Hi folks, thanks for watching my monologue. As you may have heard, there's been a recent run on guns and ammunition. I just wanted to let you know that Guns Etc. is in a 10,200 square foot building which holds a lot of guns. So Guns Etc. is open and has a lot of product. Or you can go to gunsetc.com, that's gunsetc.com. And if you like my monologue, please subscribe to our channel using 960 The Patriot. Welcome back. Happy May 4th. I was thinking this weekend about what we can all use and need just about now. It's a time of year when many college graduates get commencement addresses dedicated to such advice, and of course a lot of those are being put off or suspended or delivered virtually. I saw Tom Hanks give one this weekend, and what I read of it I personally don't love, but then again I don't love a lot of what is said at commencement addresses. They are usually filigreed with messages that you can do anything. And it doesn't cause all that much harm, but it's just not that true either. A lot of people can do a great many things, of course, and if they focus on the virtues, they can achieve a lot. But not everything and not anything. So I often give a commencement address this time of year, and as opposed to telling graduates what to do or what they can do, it's the messages and lessons I've learned. And I'll give mine for this year, later this week. It doesn't change much from year to year because the messages, I suppose, are what we would put in the category of durables. But I guess no good and great messages should really change from year to year. What I would like to do first is read a few that are different and I hope more useful. They're not the kind that usually get highlighted on Twitter or Facebook or other social media or other online places either. And the first thing I thought of was, who are some of my favorite public intellectuals, some of whom we get to have on the show from time to time? What do they share with graduates and their families? When I think of my first category, my top 5 favorite public intellectuals, the kind of person, whenever they write or speak or debate, I want to read or listen to, I think of someone like Hadley Arkes, who for years was a professor of jurisprudence at Amherst College. Blessedly, I have a commencement address he delivered to Hillsdale students a few years back, and I'd love to share some of it with you. I've edited some of it, but herewith Hadley Arkes' advice and message, and we'll do others this week as well. Years ago, he wrote, or said, we brought back to my college, Amherst, one of our most accomplished graduates, a man who had simultaneously earned a PhD in philosophy and a law degree. He began his talk by remarking that all of the students gathered around him in the hall were representing already a serious departure from the principle of equality and distribution. For if their parents, he said, had settled the price of an Amherst education on the person in the neighborhood most deserving of that education, it's not clear that everyone in that hall would have been the recipient. Later on at dinner for him, he was asked about a life of teaching and writing. He said that writing came easy for him, and it allowed him to spend a lot of time working at home with family around him. He had 4 children, ranging in ages from 17 to 7. Some wise guy, gently ribbing him, remarked that it must be considerable advantage to those children to have the concentrated attention of a father who was at once a distinguished figure in philosophy and the teaching of law, and if those attentions were allocated to the young people in the neighborhood most deserving of those attentions, it is not clear that those 4 would have been the beneficiaries. It is eminently fitting, if not the mark of a crimped nature, that parents take a heightened responsibility for the children who are theirs. We know enough by now to know this: the most natural of sentiments has not always held true. Not all parents have not been protective of their children. Some have been willing to get rid of their children, and some have had a merchandising attitude toward their offspring. We think of Woody Allen's line that, "This is a watch that my father, on his deathbed, sold me." But this is a day for people who have borne their responsibilities, parents and children, in reaching this day, and reaching it in the presence of faculty pursuing a rather distinct mission. And I want to talk about that mission understood in this place. I don't want to sound like that cleric described by George Eliot and Daniel Deronda, a man who seems to fancy that his personal correspondence was part of the history of Protestantism. But I wonder if I could lead you into these remarks by telling a bit of my own experience teaching at a small college in New England, working on the assumption that my colleagues see this vocation as my colleagues at Hillsdale and I see it. Early in my teaching at Amherst, I was teaching a course on political parties. I told another junior professor that I was determined that no student of mine would flub a question on political parties, as I had during an oral for honors as an undergraduate myself. My colleague confided in me that this was the wrong measure. We cannot make the course an annex to the graduate schools. Most of the students in the course will not even be majors in political science, and this could be the only course they will have in the subject. The question is, how does this course stand on its own as a contribution to liberal arts education, which is another way of saying, where does this course on parties, of all things, fit into the history of philosophy? That history may focus on the way in which political regimes, the public and private lives of people in a republic, are affected by a regime that lives on and through a public contest for power, and an argument staged in public about the things that are just or unjust, right or wrong. My late colleague, Joe Epstein, in philosophy, once put it to me this way: you are a doctor of philosophy resident in the Department of Political Science. Your task is to engage the students where they are in the issues of the day that engage them, but then to lead them back to the enduring questions of philosophy. My friend Dan Robinson, at college at the time in psychology, used to say that our mission was to shape students who could not be bought and not be fooled. If they became judges, they should not be intimidated by witnesses who display before them regression equations. They should not suffer tremors when they look at a graph. And we happen to think, we young professors, that we bring people a long way to the point of not being bought when we bring them to the point where they are not easily fooled, where they are not taken in by slogans masquerading as principles. The question, we used to say, was whether our students had a principled ground for their motivations and reasons for their actions. In that vein, we used to cite that fine passage from Aristotle in the Ethics, when he said that the study of politics may not hold much interest for those people, young or old, for whom life consists of a series of disconnected emotional episodes, but for those people who are generally concerned that there may be some connection in principle between the judgments they made last week and the judgments they make today. This study of politics could be quite instructive. Or as Immanuel Kant put it, when we respect a person, we are registering our reverence for that law of which he happens to be an example. And so the question for us, forming our mission, is this: can we bring our students to the point where they can give an account of that law or those principles of which they happen to be examples? We like to think that we are engaged here in what used to be called higher education. And it was especially suitable then to raise the question of what was indeed higher and lower in the things we could know. What's lower education? We come to know how to drive a car, but then we could drive an ambulance or we could drive a getaway car for the mafia, right? With that knowledge, we could do either. And so we must ask, which is higher? The knowledge of how to drive or the knowledge of those ends or purposes of driving that are justified or unjustified, right or wrong? Just knowing how to drive does not give that answer. It could be an ambulance or a getaway car. The answer was contained in what we might call the logic of morals itself. As Thomas Aquinas taught us, the good of the right is that which everyone is obliged to do. The wrong is that which everyone is obliged to refrain from doing. The good is the higher than the bad, more desirable than the bad. And so the knowledge of good, the knowledge of right and wrong, is higher than the knowledge of technical means. The knowledge of right and wrong is better than an ignorance of right and wrong, or a life lived with indifference to matters of right and wrong. Thus, it would be better to know the difference between driving an ambulance or a getaway car, even if you didn't know how to drive either or at all. Higher than the knowledge of driving the car is the knowledge, the moral knowledge of the ends of driving that are good or bad, right or wrong, justified or unjustified. Well, then, if we trace it all along and follow the track of the questions, we are led to ask, who does the highest work in the society? Who has the highest art or science, the science that directs everything else? Aristotle's answer is one that predictably jars people or leaves them scratching their heads. The highest science he held is political science. Now, I've seen political science gathered in large numbers, and when they are assembled in mass, they don't exactly strike you as the people you would choose to rule the world or even mow the lawn and get it right. But political science is at its peak the science of reflecting on the principles of justice, the nature of the just political order, and the things we are justified in imposing on people with the force of law. Political science, as Aristotle taught, was the architectonic science, the science that knew the first order principles, the principles that could give proportion and scale to everything else. Well, all that was Hadley's first thought on what students should be reminded of, and I'm going to guess most students in a 4-year or 5-year college system or plan would have never even contemplated the difference between knowing how to drive and knowing why to drive, or what to drive for, or are there different kinds of driving morally, as there are different kinds of lives lived morally. And as I was reading that, I realized it wasn't soft and the kind of encouragement that just makes everyone feel good at a typical commencement address. But then again, that's the problem I paused on so much. Perhaps we'd be a lot better if we all stopped working on feeling good and instead worked harder on doing and being good. The first is self-centered and selfish. The second, much harder. But it does seem to me that doing good or being good will ultimately reward the doer and the beer, if you will. Whereas the quest to just feel good, to just satisfy the self, will never end and never be realized. More people, like our founders, used to understand that. And it seems to me it's an understanding we should all do our best to reclaim. And that is where we shall stop, or better yet, commence today. The first ethic and effort may get you through a day, how to feel better. The latter, how to do better, it seems to me gets you through life. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.